Art can do anything. Art can ignite our creativity. Art can help us grow stronger. In Texas, the arts help grow a more innovative, collaborative, and productive workforce. With your support, there's nothing art can't do. Support the arts. Support Texas at artcantexas.org.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the 2021 State of the Arts Report, a look at the data. My name is Heidi Marquez-Smith, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Texas Cultural Trust. Can't believe we're finally here, and I am so eager for you to hear from everyone we have on our panel today. Joining us today also as guests are members of our Partners in the Arts program, our State of the Arts Council, our Arts Education Task Force, and the extended family of collaborators and supporters. I'd also like to acknowledge the Texas Cultural Trust Board leadership and attendance, as well as our partners at the Texas Commission of the Arts and Texans for the Arts. Thank you so much for being with us today. So you are aware, just a couple of notes of housekeeping, we'll be recording this webinar and making it available on our website. Please pose any questions by using the Q&A button found at the bottom of your screen. You can also share comments at any time using the chat box. We will present as many questions as possible throughout the presentation. For those of you that may be new to the Trust, we were established in 1995 as a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting and increasing access and awareness for the arts across our state. We have 6 programs, but today we will only be focusing on our ArtCan program. This program and statewide awareness campaign is a pillar of the Trust. It is a reason why we do everything else we do, and allows us to research and produce data to quantify the impact of the arts in our state. So these findings are published in the biennial State of the Arts Report. You'll be hearing us refer to it as the SOTAR. So now you're in the loop. And it demonstrates the undeniable impact that the arts have in shaping our cultural, economic, and educational future of Texas. So why is this important, and why are you gathered here today? The State of the Arts Report serves as a resource for our state's artists, arts organizations, advocates, educators, policymakers, parents, philanthropists, and others, so we can increase support and awareness and funding for arts and culture. So really it is relevant and a resource to all Texans. Like many organizations, the Trust experienced and worked through the negative impact of COVID-19. The road to this year's report was a challenge. It was a beast, I'm not gonna lie. We've had many adaptations to our program since the start of this pandemic, and the rollout of this report was a monumental feat. And I have to start off by saying thank you for the many minds and the hands who contributed to the development and publication of this study. We could not have done it without you. I'm pleased that you'll be hearing from some of our researchers today, but none of this would have been possible without our major sponsors. The Houston Endowment, who started off this program with us, the CH Foundation, the Woody and Gail Hunt Family Foundation, and Leslie and Jack Blanton Jr. I would like to express my personal appreciation to these sponsors and researchers, our partners, our production, for their commitment to the study. I thank you for bringing this report to reality and endorsing the need for this research. The complete 2021 SOTAR, the State of the Arts Report, is now available online at artcantexas.org. You can also go to txculturaltrust.org and look for ArtCan program. I do invite you to look at the study digitally, or you are also welcome to order one from our online store. And do share the link with your network. Help us to empower our art and culture community with this critical information. So I don't want to steal our presenter's thunder, but I will share that this report is the most comprehensive State of the Arts report to date. New to this year's study was the addition of research in the areas of arts and education and social and emotional learning and arts and health. You'll be hearing more about this from today's presenters. This report serves many, many purposes. It helps establish consistent and unified language surrounding the importance of the arts in Texas. It functions as a tool to increase awareness for the value of the arts. It also serves as a resource as we advocate during this legislative session in Texas. One of our biggest goals right now is to restore critical cultural district funding to the Texas Commission of the Arts. And through that, we were able to quantify why it's important for our state to invest in TCA and in cultural districts because of the uncomparable economic activity that comes out of a small investment. While the 2021 State of the Arts Report provides insight into the power and contributions of our arts and culture industries, it only offers a snapshot of the vibrancy from 2019. Much has happened since then, as you know. As I mentioned, this data is from 2019, and the data from 2020 is going to look quite different, unfortunately. Our arts and culture and creative sector has faced devastating headwinds amid the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. As many know, this sector was the first to shut down, and it will be among the last to reopen to pre-pandemic vibrancy. Nearly all art and culture organizations in Texas have reported economic losses, and the viability of some of these performing art venues, visual art spaces, and centers of community life has been brought into question. We know that this report paints a rosy picture of the arts because they are so powerful in times when we are not in a pandemic. We will not have the numbers associated with COVID-19 until later this year. Until then, consider this report as a look at what we have done together, not where we are today. Now let's begin. Is Jenny Perry, our Director of Programs, who will introduce us to today's speakers. Thank you all for being with us. Jenny?
Thank you, Heidi. So we want to make sure that you leave today with a solid understanding of the research, data, and resources available to you. As Heidi mentioned, we invite you to post any questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will address these questions following each topic. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers. Today we will hear from Travis James on the impact of the arts in the Texas economy, Dr. Brent Hasty and Dr. Cinda on the impact of arts education and inequities of access in Texas schools, Dr. Robin Ward on the connection between arts education and social and emotional learning, and Todd Frazier on the arts in medicine, health, and well-being. And first, we will hear from Travis James. Travis is Vice President of TXP Inc., which is an economic analysis and public policy consulting firm. Travis brings over 20 years of experience in economic analysis, strategic planning, and policy development to this project. TXP has produced the research and analysis for the Trust's economic initiatives since 2007. Travis's research for the Trust includes the economic impact of the arts and culture industry, creative sector occupations, core and supporting arts industries, return on investment for cultural district funding, and cultural tourism in Texas. And now I will turn it over to Travis.
Thank you, Jenny. I can't believe it's been since 2007. I thought it was 2008. So I've been doing this a long time. I think some of you have probably heard me speak in the past. And as you know, I think what Heidi said is really important, that some of the data we're going to focus on is pre-pandemic when things were going great. There's been a 20 to 40% drop off depending on what data sets you're using and what industry you're looking at. But let's talk about how important arts and culture are to the state. We've typically done it in 4 areas: creative careers, arts and culture industry, tourism, and cultural districts. So let's talk a little bit about creative careers. This is data that we've been tracking for 10 to 12 years and really focuses on the things you're going to hear from Brent and Cinda and Robin later, which is the role art education has in preparing people and students for 21st century jobs. We call these creative careers. And when you look at the first box that pulls out, when Kenneth moves forward one, as I said, these are what we think of as the 21st century careers that people want. It's about 1 in 15 jobs in the state of Texas today, about 900,000 jobs overall. And over the next 5 to 6 years, these jobs are supposed to increase by 17%. We need to fill 113,000 new jobs. So how do we do that? I think we do that on the next pullout. You'll see that it's about 900,000 jobs. As I said, 1 in 15. That box down there on the right, this is the breakdown by metropolitan statistical area. So you can see how important these creative careers are to different regions of the state. And as you notice in those 2 columns to the right, when you're talking to folks and advocating for art education and why it's important, these jobs pay nearly twice the non-creative wage. So as we think about the economic impact of arts and culture, it's art for art's sake. It makes you a better worker, and it helps us fill those jobs that every region across the state are going after. And the last call out box that pops up again, if you remember Richard, Florida, 10 to 12 years ago, the rise of the creative class, This talks about critical thinking, innovation, creativity. You get kids to stay in school, they do better in school, they go to college, and it allows us to fill these jobs with Texans as opposed to having to recruit more folks in from out of state. So again, this is the creative career stuff we've talked about. It's usually about between 1 in 10 and 1 in 15 jobs throughout the state of Texas are in these creative careers. So really, really important because they're growing fast, everybody wants them, and they pay better than non-creative careers. On the next slide, all right, so this is the exciting stuff. This is the 6 billion number that Heidi likes to say, and we talk about all the time. So we'll click one more. So this is now, we think about how people consume arts and culture. Okay, so these are about 37 industries that we say create arts and culture across the state. Last year, about $6 billion in taxable sales. Not all sales in Texas are taxable, but this generates $6 billion in taxable sales. And when you multiply that by the 6 1/4 sales tax on the next box that pops up, you'll see it generates $380 million in general fund tax revenue for the state. So that's really, really important when we think about asking for 10 or 15 or $20 million for TCA. Let's not forget and let's remind folks that Texans like to consume arts and culture. We consume $6 billion that generated $380 million for the state of Texas. And what you see down there on the bottom right is how much it's grown over time, right? It's grown 30% over the past 10 years. It'll be interesting to see what it does in 2020 when people couldn't go to the theater, they couldn't go hear a play, they couldn't go to a concert. So it's likely that these numbers will go down, not because Texans don't want it, it just wasn't available to them. Okay, so when we think about arts and culture, those 37 industries, it's about 100,000 Texans that work in the next pull-up box, the core arts and culture industry. So one thing that's new to this report that you haven't seen in the past is the Bureau of Economic Analysis does what they call arts and culture satellite accounts. I won't bore you with the technical detail, but it's a better way, it's a more robust way, I think, of thinking about core arts and culture plus all of the supporting industries that are required to produce that arts and culture. Sometimes when you see an economic impact study, you think about it as the ripple effects. But when you add together the core and supporting, it's about 380 or 387,000 Texans are employed between the core and the supporting. Generates about $26 billion a year in earnings and wages for Texans. So again, another really big impact on arts and culture. And again, this speaks to what Texans are consuming, the core and the supporting. So this is a data set that we released for 2018 and 2019 that's in the study. Hopefully we'll do this going forward to do a better job capturing the core and supporting. So again, $6 billion, 380 million, which you'll see on the next slide. And before I ask Kenneth to hit the button, on the bottom left corner down there, like we've done in the past, we've assumed these are the metro areas. So we took that $6 billion and we broke it down to the metro area. A lot of cities have more than a 1% sales tax. Some folks have transit authorities, but to make it simple so you could talk about the impact of arts and culture on your region, we've just assumed that everybody has a 1% sales tax rate. So this table on the bottom left talks about those arts and culture sales generating money for local and county government. Tourism, as we talked about in the past, is important. About a third of the folks that come to Texas on the next pop-up that comes up, it'll show you there on the left that about a third of the folks that come to Texas participate in arts and culture while they're on vacation. The total tourism industry in the state of Texas is about 720,000 jobs. Not all of those are related to this arts and culture spending, but we know about 40% of it is. And when you look at the details, what we know, and this has been true the past 3 or 4 years, I've worked with Nate over at the governor's office, arts and culture tourists stay longer, they spend more money, and more people come in their party. So if we can get folks to participate and we give them arts and culture when they come to Texas to visit, they stay longer and they spend more money, and that adds to the additional economic impact on the state. And on my last slide, And I know I'm going quick, but there's lots of detail and I can answer questions. So about, 8 years ago, we looked at cultural district grants when the funding came back. We tried to determine what was the economic impact of these cultural district grants. We looked at 4 or 5. So this year, we had some great partners at the Kimball that a Renoir exhibit, the Abilene Cultural District. They had a really interesting project because they already have lots of arts and culture. They went for an infrastructure type project to improve lighting and safety so people could walk around the cultural district at night and spend more time. The Houston Ballet's Nutcracker, and then the City of El Paso's Chalk the Block project. So what we did is we got data for them and we focused on people who come from outside of the region. So this is a more conservative way to think about an economic impact of these grants. So they gave us visitor data, where folks came from. In the report, you're going to see maps that show the zip codes from where folks come from. And what we found out is that the state invested through cultural district grants about $542,000, about $52.3 million in economic activity. So what this says is that if you invest in these programs and these institutions, we can have a really strong return on investment when it comes to the economic impact. And so I think that this is something that hopefully we can continue to get this funding to have more and more of these kinds of projects. And if you look, and you'll see in the report, when you look at the tax revenue side, you know, the state's investing about $500,000 and they're generating an additional $500,000. For a lot of the times, these programs are paying for themselves. And so that we're able to generate economic activity and tax revenue by investing in these programs. So with that, I know that was fast. My time is up.
Thank you so much, Travis, for your expertise in this area and for being with us today. Understanding the economic impact of the arts and the return on investment of public funding for the arts is critical data, and it's needed as we advocate for a vibrant arts and culture economy in Texas. So we just have one question for you today. So how can we use this information when advocating for the recovery of the arts and public funding in Texas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would focus on the $6 billion in taxable sales and that it generates, you know, over $380 million in state tax revenue. That the arts do pay for themselves. It's what Texans want. It's what our tourists want. And that right now they're going to be hurting. And that funding is going to be crucial to helping them reopen and give people a reason to come to Texas. I think we're all ready to travel and get out, and we need to have things to go do. And so I think just focusing on the jobs and the tax revenue generated is an important way to say that the arts, you know, pay for themselves or at least generate a positive return on investment.
Well, thank you so much, Travis. So next, we will hear from Dr. Brent Hasty and Dr. Cinda Christian on the impact of arts education and the inequities of access in Texas schools. Dr. Christian has more than 20 years of experience conducting and supervising program evaluations. She serves the Austin ISD Department of Research and Evaluation and currently directs the evaluation of multiple programs intended to have an impact on the integration of social services and arts within the education system, supplemental services for students at risk of dropping out of school, and school safety and climate. She is a published author of institutional reports, book chapters, and peer-reviewed journal articles. Dr. Hasty leads the education research and analysis for the Trust, and he is the executive director of MindPOP, a solutions-based organization ensuring every child benefits from creative learning. He is a former high school teacher and clinical assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin, where he taught elementary social studies methods in the teacher preparation program. His research has been presented internationally and published peer-reviewed journals, including the Action in Teacher Education and Arts and Learning Research Journal. Both Dr. Christian and Dr. Hasty serve as members of the Trust's Arts Education Task Force. And now we will hear from Dr. Christian and Dr. Hasty.
Thank you. I'm Brent Hasty, and I'm joined by Cinda. For the 2021 State of the Arts report, we examined the state of student access to the arts across the state of Texas. We used because there's not a single lever metrics for access, we looked at a combination of factors: student course enrollments, unique courses offered, the proportion of fine arts full-time equivalency staffing, and student-teacher ratios in order to get a complicated picture of what student access looks like. Cinda will explain a little later the details of that. But generally, what we found in 2018-19 is that students on average in Texas do have access to the arts. Unfortunately, this access is not equally distributed across art forms, across community classification types, such as rural or urban or suburban, or across economic lines. In 2014, the Texas Cultural Trust focused on the academic impacts of participation in the arts. We accessed student-level data housed at the Educational Resource Center at the University of Texas at Austin and found an association between more arts participation and better graduation rates, better standardized test passing rates, and improved college enrollment by the age of 26. This data held for every region across the state of Texas and every demographic subgroup. This research of Texas students mirrors similar findings that we found in national studies regarding the impacts of the arts. In addition, I believe it echoes the values our communities across the state of Texas place on the arts. Because we know from research that students engaging in the arts at higher levels share these positive characteristics, we believe we have a responsibility to make certain all students have access to those same conditions. We believe that all students deserve access to the arts, and that is what led into our study this year. Cinda?
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit more about what we meant by access to the arts. We looked at several different factors, as Brent mentioned, and it's important to emphasize here that access to the arts, in our opinion, cannot be measured with just a single data point. And so that's why we looked across many. The fine arts course enrollments, we looked at every instance or every time a student was enrolled in an arts course. We looked at fine arts course offerings. So in other words, what was the proportion of arts courses offered at each campus compared to all the courses that were offered at the campus? We also looked at the number of fine arts teachers full-time equivalents. So by focusing on full-time equivalents or FTEs, we were able to distinguish between part-time positions or positions that were shared across schools or across districts even, and not assume that every teacher who was an arts teacher at a campus was teaching there full-time. And then we also finally looked at students to the fine arts teacher ratio. So what was the amount of access that the students would have to a teacher teaching fine arts in their school? For each of these outcomes, we are interested in the relative proportion to all enrollments, all courses, all FTEs at the school. So we didn't just look at the raw numbers, we looked at the proportions because we know that campuses vary by size, and so that would be important. We gathered the descriptive data for the 2018-19 school year, which was the last sort of regular school year that we have had. And we looked at each school, including the data we gathered include the school, the district, the region, the community classification, the level of the school. So was it high school or secondary? Was it a secondary or elementary school? We looked at district and campus accountability ratings. We also gathered campus staffing information, campus course offerings, student enrollments for courses, including the fine arts enrollments by the art form that they participated in. And finally, we gathered student demographics for each campus, including gender, ethnicity, eligibility for free and reduced price lunch, limited English proficiency, and at-risk student status. So just as a side note, we did eliminate schools that did not have a Texas Education Agency accountability rating, those that had fewer than 10 students, and those that crossed multiple grade level groupings. For example, they had kindergarten through 12th grade at a single campus, because we did look at the analysis by grade levels. where we had masked values of less than 5, for example, less than 5 students enrolled in a fine arts course, we used mean values, so we would have used 2.5 in that instance. Let's see. For the what we found, so let's go ahead and flip to the findings. What we found is students in high poverty schools on average had less access to arts than students in low poverty schools. We found this true for every measure of access for students in schools that have 50% or more students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch. There was a lower proportion of fine arts courses offered in the economically disadvantaged schools as well. And finally, student to teacher ratios indicate that students in economically disadvantaged schools have less access to art teachers than do students in non-economically disadvantaged schools. So for example, in Texas, the average number of students per fine arts teacher in schools that have 50% or more students who are economically disadvantaged was 375 students per arts teacher, while in schools that were non-economically disadvantaged, they had only 283 students per arts teacher. As a proportion of all subjects, economically disadvantaged schools dedicated fewer teacher FTE resources to teaching of the arts. Students enroll in a lower proportion of fine arts courses, also in economically disadvantaged schools than they do in non-economically disadvantaged schools. These inequities associated with schools with a higher percentage of students eligible for free and reduced price lunch were heightened when the school was also in a rural community. So this compounding of these factors left students in poor rural areas with significantly less access to the arts. Students, okay, this is what we're showing here now. Students in urban schools on average had more access to the arts than those in rural schools. And students in suburban schools had more access to the arts than those in either urban or rural schools. So this was true in both elementary and secondary schools. And this was true in both high and low poverty schools. So for example, in rural campuses, the average proportion of unique fine arts courses to all courses offered in Texas school was 15%, while suburban campuses offered a proportion of unique fine arts courses over 25%. So urban school districts fell in the middle. They had a proportion of unique fine arts courses to all courses at about almost 23%. So go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, while we found inequities to access among high poverty schools and in schools across community types like rural and urban schools, we also found that fine arts offerings were not equally distributed by art form. The greatest proportion of courses offered, for example, are in music and visual art, while theater and dance lagged far behind. For example, music courses accounted for 11% of all unique courses, 10.55, and dance courses only accounted for 0.39% of all unique course offerings in Texas. The same variances we saw for high poverty schools were maintained in the different art forms as well. So the findings that Cinda described earlier for high poverty and low poverty schools are also mirrored when you disaggregate by art form. We also found that those inequity held for rural district compared to suburban and urban districts. So the problem is systemic and the problem is consistent. So as you can see, while students do have access to the arts, serious disparities exist in access for some students. We hope this data inspires policymakers and community leaders to address these disparities for our students, particularly those in rural communities and those in high poverty schools. We have an obligation to serve all students in Texas. And thanks to the Cultural Trust, leaders at the local level can compare their arts access data in their community against the trends that we've reported here by logging into the ArtCan Texas website and searching individual schools and their district. We thank you for your time, and we thank you for your commitment to making sure that all kids in Texas have access to the arts and benefits that are associated with these activities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cinda and Brent, for sharing the impact of arts education and the inequities of access in our Texas public schools. Having a clear understanding of how arts education affects student outcomes, prepares the 21st century workforce, and the inequities that exist in Texas schools is essential as we advocate for the protection and advancement of arts education in Texas. And next, we will hear from Dr. Robin Ward about her research on the correlation between arts education and social and emotional learning, in addition to national studies on the impact of arts education in academic outcomes. Dr. Ward is a professor of mathematics and the director of curriculum integration for the Rice University School Mathematics Project. A former aerospace engineer, Dr. Ward is a two-time recipient of a Stanford American Society for Engineering Education Fellowship. She has developed educational materials for NASA and has received over $10 million in educational grants. An advocate of arts integration, Dr. Ward has been published nationally and internationally on this topic and is the author of 5 teacher resource books on using art and children's literature in K-8 mathematics classrooms and 7 children's counting books. Dr. Ward is also a member of the Texas Cultural Trust's Arts Education Task Force. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Ward.
And let me know when y'all are ready.
Go ahead, Dr. Ward.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the Texas Cultural Trust for entrusting me with the honor to briefly share with you my research findings on how arts education supports social and emotional learning and academic success. Despite being a mathematics professor, I have spent over 2 decades using the visual arts to teach mathematics in grades pre-K through 12. And thus arts integration has been the focus of my research and practice. When we talk about the arts impact in Texas schools and in all schools, I would start off by saying that, as the heading suggests in the report, that arts improve education and they develop social and emotional learning skills. And thus, as this pop-up box represents, engaging in the visual art, in the arts, it increases a student's opportunity to be more successful in life and in their community. And that's why we're here today. And that's why we need to continue to advocate for the arts. Now, the reason that students become more successful in life and in their community is because the arts create positive behaviors. And that's what's shown in this next pop-up box. In particular, the arts, they teach students how to collaborate and communicate. The arts reinforce kindness, sharing, and empathy. And they also maintain positive behaviors. And so these are interpersonal skills. The arts also encourage practice, persistence, patience. The arts help students become more confident, to persevere, and become more self-aware. And these are intrapersonal skills. And in a moment, I'm going to circle back to this idea of inter and intrapersonal skills. And so given all of these positive behaviors, it shouldn't come as a surprise that students reap academic benefits. In particular, and Dr. Hasty shared this, the research tells us that the more years that students are enrolled in arts education, the more likely they are to go to college, get better test scores, demonstrate lower dropout rates. Other items in our report point to the fact that the arts education impacts students in terms of having better attendance rates and that at-risk students are twice as likely to graduate from high school. So if we go to the next slide, I mentioned a few minutes ago about inter and intrapersonal skills. And that's where SEL, social and emotional learning, comes in. This term SEL was coined in 1994 by CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And the 5 core SEL competencies are listed in that blue box. And these skills, as the research tells us, are necessary for effective life functioning, and these skills can be taught. And so if you look at these 5 competencies, the first 2, self-awareness and self-management, are the intrapersonal skills. The next 2 competencies, social awareness and relationship skills, they relate to interpersonal skills. And finally, that last competency of responsible decision-making, I would say really straddles both of those arenas, intra and interpersonal skills. And thus we have this strong connection between SEL, social and emotional learning, and the positive behaviors that arts create. So I would argue, based on the research, that there's a very kind of a symbiotic and almost a bidirectional relationship that exists between social and emotional learning and arts education, as all 5 of these competencies can be taught, honed, and developed very naturally and organically through arts education. And that's because the arts include highly social activities, and thus they provide students with opportunities to interact and to self-reflect. And conversely, by engaging in the arts, an individual can participate in his or her own social and emotional learning. So when we combine arts education and social and emotional learning skills, the research describes a variety of personal and academic outcomes, namely the likelihood of high school graduation, better readiness for post-secondary education, career success, positive relationships, better mental health, reduced criminal behavior, and engaged citizenship. So in closing, I would contend that based on my research findings, that what happens in arts education is really synonymous with social and emotional learning. And attention to both are critical to ensure that all students in Texas and in all of our states and beyond do succeed both in and out of the classroom.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you for sharing the vital role that arts education has in students' social and emotional learning. Now more than ever, we know that SEL and arts education are critical for a child's holistic education and well-being. We do have a few questions related to arts education. So a couple of them I'll direct to specific speakers. So a question for Robin. What role do you see arts education and SEL having in schools in our current times and as campuses return to normal?
Yeah, there was some research that was coming out, kind of in the midst of COVID on the importance of arts education, because it does allow students that time to reflect, express their emotions. And then again, it's collaborating and communicating with their peers and their mentors and their teachers. So I think more than ever, we just need to continue infusing arts education, just because as our other presenters have noted and what the research tells us, there are so many academic and personal benefits that are the outcomes when students have that exposure.
Thank you. And then a question for Cinda and Brent. Why is the 1 fine arts credit requirement critical for a well-rounded education?
I think there are a lot of reasons, and I think the data would show that when you look at disparities at the elementary level where there's not a requirement, and you look at the data for secondary where there is a requirement, the distance between high poverty and low poverty or rural and suburban schools is much less in the secondary than it is reported by school districts at the elementary level. One possible explanation is that credit is mediating that disparity. So it's actually that requirement. And one plausible explanation is it's that credit that is creating a smaller gap in the inequities between high poverty and low poverty schools, or kids who live in rural communities or in suburban communities.
Thank you so much. That's an excellent explanation. And this question really goes to all three of you. How do we impact the culture of a community as we impact arts access? It seems the community is, if the community is not arts rich, it's hard to model to students and families moving into arts jobs. And also if those jobs do not exist in those communities, how do we illustrate moving into such careers? And how can we work with communities to make those inroads for students, especially in our poorest communities?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that. I mean, I think in part it's an economic development issue, right? It's I think creating something locally ties into the cultural district program, making sure people can go engage in cultural district and those type of activities. And other research we've done for the trust, those creative career type folks that maybe aren't artists are attracted to those creative cultural districts, and that kind of reinforces opportunities and models career paths for people. So I think it's a combination of sort of economic development, recruiting those careers, building your cultural infrastructure, making sure what you heard from Robin and Cinda and Brent, that the education system supports arts and culture, and it all ties together. But it's not easy. I mean, it's challenging.
Building on that, it may be unfair to put this responsibility on arts educators, but what we do know is 6% of the FTEs across the state of Texas are fine arts teachers. There are over 23,000 fine arts FTEs in the state, and those people are in every community across our state. And so if we can increase those numbers, particularly where they are disproportionately under-resourced, then those individuals can serve to some small degree as models or gateways to what's possible. Supporting things like broadband and information access is also critical as we really think about how technology can unlock those what's possible for kids, regardless of where they live and under what conditions.
And I would also add, I think it's critical that we raise the awareness in the general public of the benefits, the academic and the personal and social benefits of arts education. I think there tends to be this sense of, oh, the arts are just, oh, you're painting a picture, singing a song. And I think that's very naive, obviously. And I think if there's a way to just better disseminate the message of the positive impact of arts education, that might kind of start this wave of garnering more support for arts in our schools.
And I think it's probably also, Linda, it's important for people to see folks that they see as successful that have that art education. Very few of us go to college and sort of go do what we have our degree in. And I think it's pointing out examples of people who have an art history degree or who have a dance, major that do arts and culture, but other things to show that value, especially in those types of communities.
Well, this has really been a rich discussion. And I will say that later in just a few minutes, I'll be sharing the resources that the Trust has made available to help teachers, parents, arts providers, community providers, and patrons help guide them in advocacy to grow awareness and to really feed those communities that need more arts access. But finally, we will hear from Todd Frazier about the arts and how they can improve our health and well-being. Todd Frazier is director of Houston Methodist Hospital Center for Performing Arts Medicine, CPAM, and founder of American Festival for the Arts and Houston Arts Partners. His work in the nonprofit sector focuses on the arts as a unique and dynamic common denominator in strategic collaboration and innovation. He has spent more than 20 years forging and supporting research, education, and accessibility collaborations between K through 12, university, hospital, and arts and culture communities throughout the nation. For CPAM, he directs specialized artists' healthcare, integration of the arts in the hospital environment, therapy that utilizes the arts in clinical patient care, and research that seeks to harness the broadest potential of the arts in therapy, rehabilitation, and human performance. And now I'll turn it over to Todd.
Well, thank you very much for supporting this field that I'm calling arts and health. And some of you may sense that there has been a sort of a pendulum swing in healthcare from more of the specialty siloed type of approach to a more humanistic and patient-centered experience, for the user. And I think a lot of hospitals have embraced this. It's been good for this field of arts and health. And I think this will continue to grow and support this emerging field and offer more career opportunities for artists and offer a stronger voice for the arts in broader communities. The community arts and health area of this, I think, is the next big area that this is going to grow and will affect a lot of working professional artists. Essentially, it's using a lot of the similar techniques and approaches that we have refined in the hospital setting through the creative arts therapies, staff care, and supportive patients, but using them in response to the community in trauma or health challenges in the community that could take the form of a school shooting or a natural disaster, all the way to mental health challenges in general in communities. And having artists trained in a way to use the arts to reduce anxiety and offer rejuvenation and hope. So the mural program that is an example in the report is one of those, and many of you see those as physical examples in communities that give pride to communities and highlight meaningful connections. Another example, something here we're doing in Houston with the University of Houston, and I think is a great example of a collaboration between a hospital, university, and a city. We're actually developing programming for a mobile arts response unit, which is essentially a vehicle that will be dispatched to areas of the city that are in some need or in some transitioning situations. And the programming will be specifically geared to elevate mood, lower anxiety, and to offer rejuvenation, but at the same time, offer information on health resources, offer information about how people can take care of themselves better. And University of Houston, for example, now if you're in their fine arts program and you take 4 additional credits, you can graduate with an arts and health certificate. So we're also seeing a lot of the universities sort of follow suit and develop more educational programs for artists that can expand their career opportunities. If you're interested in learning more about community arts and health, there's a lot of work being done by Daisy Fancourt at the University College in London. The University of Florida is probably the most robust education institution right now for this. They have a degree in community arts and health, and also a research database. There's also a pretty robust research database at the University of Rhode Island, which is specifically geared at influencing public officials to the value of the arts, and in this case, arts and health. So as we transition to what's going on in the hospital, we're proud that the trust has used the Houston Methodist Center for Performing Arts Medicine as an example. And we do use the arts broadly across the hospital, from patient care in rehab, especially neuro rehab, to mental health, the neonatal intensive care, to palliative care, as well as a growing demand for staff support. In fact, it's been recognized as one of the tools of the hospital that has the broadest potential use and the broadest potential solutions, meaning that it can work just as effectively in supporting staff care as it can in supporting the infusion center. And we do track how the arts can be a solution for healthcare. And we touch on indicators that include pain and wait time, length of stay, cost, health outcomes, community reintegration. And here we have clearly tied these to cost-effective approaches for the hospital. And so I'm proud to say that the hospital has been more and more supporting our work through operations rather than requiring philanthropy, which is another good thing for artists. Right now, we're working on a bill for music therapy licensure as a requirement in the state legislature. This would continue to improve the professional status of the arts and health, and also increase opportunities for insurance reimbursement. And finally, at the very right of the arts and health page, there has been, this has trickled up all the way to DC. So just in the last few years, up to $20 million has been released for arts and health research funding. And this is through the National Institute of Health and the National Endowment for the Arts. And we're proud in Texas for 2 of the 5 research lab grants to be placed in Texas. And so if you're Houston, Rice University is studying the impact of creative learning, which connects to a lot of things that you're talking about. One of the things we're recognizing in our research is that experiential learning, creative learning, arts infused learning absolutely stimulates and triggers a wide variety of brain connections, chemical releases, and oxygenation that is very closely tied to healthy brain development. And for folks with early diagnosed dementia, these types of classes are starting to be offered to try to stretch and use those parts of their brains to stay off the progress. So Rice University is working on that with a grant. And then Texas Tech University received a grant to work on neurologic recovery, especially in speech, using art. So, that's a whole new arena where dollars are starting to flow into Texas through federal grants. That is new, and it might be something that maybe next time we do this report, we'll actually start to track some of those dollars as well. That's be very positive. So there's a bright future for artists expanding their careers and tying on to my previous colleague in looking at artists that may have had their fine arts degree, but are going into something a little bit different, but have found a way to use the arts in a meaningful way through health. That is something wonderful to highlight and to show for students, as well as other instructors, that the field of opportunities and careers is expanding. And the use of the arts and the purpose of the arts is also expanding. And I think that is a very healthy thing. So thank you for including us.
Thank you, Todd, for lending your expertise and leadership in the arts and health with us. The work that you lead at CPAM is so inspiring, and we are grateful for your continued partnership in this effort to grow awareness for the vital role that the arts have in health, medicine, and well-being. We do have one question for you. Are there other hospitals in Texas that offer such a comprehensive arts and health model like CPAM does? And if not, how can we encourage such programs to expand across the state?
Well, it is one of the challenges is that most of our work happens behind closed doors in what you would say is a confidential type of area. Even, taking videos and sharing examples on social media, we're very careful with patient confidentiality and that kind of thing. So it's not something that is broadly publicized like something that would happen in a theater district. So that's been one of the challenges in getting the word out more into the general community, as well as the arts community, to how this field is growing. So awareness, now that it's being adopted in some educational programs. All of this kind of thing is going to help. Yes, there are, in the Texas Medical Center, every member institution, Texas Children's has a robust programming that's geared more toward children. Methodist, we're an adult hospital, so it's more toward adults. Memorial Hermann as well. I am proud to say that I believe we at Houston Methodist, with our 8 campuses, we do have the largest program. We have 24 direct employees, and we collaborate with hundreds of other folks. You'll find very strong programs at the Cleveland Clinic. You'll find programs tied a little bit more to medical humanities at the Mayo Clinic, using the humanities in medical education. If you start to look into it, you will see that there are a lot of efforts in arts and health around the nation. The University of Michigan is one. Probably a great resource is NOAA, the National Organization for Arts and Health, on anything from wanting to find resources on how to advocate for including arts and health, to linking in to other programs around the nation as a resource. It's the NOAA I think it's .net, either .net or .org, but NOAA, National Organization for Arts and Health, recently founded just specifically to respond to that question and to help people advocate and share information.
Thank you, Todd. Well, the research and data presented in the SOTAR is an important resource for arts professionals, patrons, advocates, educators, and parents as we advocate for the arts and arts education in Texas. And to support this effort, the Trust has developed additional resources that are available to all Texans. These resources are found on the Trust website and include the Legislative Tracker, and this monitors House and Senate bills that may potentially impact the arts education, and creative industry in Texas during the 87th legislative session. The ArtCan map. The map makes it easy to explore arts education access in school districts and campuses across the state. And as Brent had mentioned earlier, you're able to search by school district, House district, Senate district, and US House. And then you can filter by arts access indicators and demographic indicators. And those interested in a detailed perspective of the data, you can even specify variables for arts access and demographic indicators inside the map. And all of the data that is visualized in the map provide an overview of the statistics in the top right, and then a detailed look at arts access compared to the state average just to the right of the map. And of course, all of the data is downloadable so that you can see those details. And then also the Trust Advocacy widget provides a communication tool for you to contact your elected officials and school district leaders by way of email or social media. You simply select if you would like to contact the school district superintendent or legislator, and then you enter your contact information, and a pre-populated arts advocacy letter is loaded that you can edit as you see fit. And then the Arts Advocacy Toolkit. This is new to the Trust, and this provides ideas and guidance for specific audience types, including teachers, parents, community arts providers, and patrons, and even students. The handbook also has social media graphics to be used broadly, and flyers that can be downloaded and printed. And all of these resources and the arts advocacy commercials for ArtCan are available on the Trust website. And of course, as Heidi mentioned, the State of the Arts report is available free to the public online, but you can also order a printed copy if you'd like on the Trust website online store. So I will enter in the chat all of these links so that you can access them and explore them. But today we really sincerely thank you for taking time to understand the data and resources available to support you as we grow awareness for the importance of the arts in Texas. We invite you to join the Texas Cultural Trust as a partner in the arts. And links to all of these, the Trust Partner in the Arts program and the Art Can program will be available in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. We're so grateful for everyone. Truly, truly important information here. And we encourage you, as Jenny said, to engage with us. Tell us more about what you want to learn about. Is there any data out there that would be valuable to your arts organization, to any artists that you're aware of? We're here as a resource to enhance the work of all the arts and culture community here in Texas. So please reach out. Don't be a stranger. And again, thank you all for your time. And we look forward to meeting once again in person. Thank you. Have a lovely week.